What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode, where I'm going to reflect on what I wish I'd asked before becoming a therapist. Genuinely, I really love this profession. If I could go back and ask these questions before I became a therapist, the answer for me would still be an emphatic yes, sign me up. I love it so much. However, I'm hearing from a number of you that you're sort of questioning your career choice at this point now that you've been in it for a bit, or you at least wish maybe you'd had a bit more information before diving into it. And so in case you're in a space where you're thinking about joining the therapy profession, I thought it might be helpful to give you a few questions that you can kind of equip yourself with as you think about whether you want to become a therapist and to sort of prepare yourself. Even if the answer is an emphatic yes for you, it's helpful to have these questions and know the answers to them so that you feel very prepared going into it. Now, in this episode, I compiled my own personal questions that I wish I would have asked myself, that I think is good advice for other people to ask themselves before becoming a therapist. But as a little bonus for the podcast episode, I put a poll out on Instagram inviting you all to share what you wish you would have asked yourself before getting started, or questions that you think people should maybe consider before deciding to become a therapist. So in the extended cut version of this episode, I'm going to share some of those questions as well and some of my own thoughts about them. All right, so let's dive into some of the questions that I wish I would have asked before deciding to become a therapist. And the first question I think anyone should ask before embarking on any career endeavor, and that's, why do I want this? Why do you want to be a therapist? Now, I know when I ask other people this question, the answer is because I want to help people, which 100%. If you don't want to help people, this is not the profession for you, let me tell you. But also there's a lot of people who want to help other people for whom this profession may not be the best fit. And there's a whole lot of things you can do to help people. Arguably, almost any service profession is a space for you to help people, or, you could be a teacher. There's a lot of things you could do to help people. Being a checker at the grocery store is helping people. So you got to get a little bit more specific about it, in my opinion. And I think what happens is most people have a much more specific, deep answer than just, I want to help people, but we just haven't quite identified all of those specifics for ourselves just yet in our conscious mind. And I think it's really helpful to call all of those reasons that we can find to our conscious mind so we can really consider, is this profession a good fit for all those very specific ways that I might like to help people? Especially now that I'm on the other side of this and I've been doing this for a while, one important aspect of being a therapist is being okay with knowing that not all of your clients are going to improve. Even if you're somehow doing your darndest best, not all of your clients are going to improve. That's just the nature of the thing. So if your one and only goal is to help people, are you going to be okay with knowing that some people are not going to get better? They're not going to reach their goals. So if you are someone who really feels like you need everyone to actually, quote unquote, get better or find the work that you're doing helpful for them, then you really might want to think that through. What are you going to do with the fact that not everyone's going to get better? Are you okay with that? Is it still worth it to you to step into this profession then? Back in graduate school, I also heard a few people at least mention that the reason they chose this profession is because they wanted to make a lot of money. Now, listen, I think at this point in 2024, there's a lot more awareness now than there was back in 2008 when I started graduate school, that if your goal is to earn a lot of money, there's a whole lot of ways to go about doing that are much easier and far less taxing. And you might work super, super hard in this profession and still not make much money at all. So if your primary goal for entering this profession is to earn money, run, don't walk in the opposite direction. If that's your objective, this is not the profession for you. Now, certainly, I am a huge advocate of people earning the income they deserve to make a living and have a retirement plan and pay your bills and all of those things. But if your reason for entering the profession is making money, oh my goodness, that's a recipe for burnout. So again, I want you to earn money if you enter this profession, but if that's your main reason for wanting to enter the profession, this is probably not the profession for you. This is an N of one. This is anecdotal. It's something I've observed in myself, but I'll name it here because I've definitely watched it happen in colleagues as well. That for me personally, one of the most important reasons why I stay in this profession is not just because I like helping people, though I do. It's not just because I like talking to people, though I do, but it's because I find this profession just inherently very interesting. And I think that's worth noting, because if you don't find the psychological concepts interesting, how the mind works interesting, how our values translate into behaviors, and how we can choose things that don't align with who we say we are, who we think we are, and all the mechanisms kind of going on that impact how we feel and how we live our lives as humans, then I think it is going to be a little bit more of an uphill, walk to find this profession worthwhile. Personally, I just find all of the psychological concepts so fascinating. It doesn't get old to me. There's always something new happening. I'm always learning something new, and my brain needs that sort of lifelong learner stimulation in order for me to be satisfied as a person, and I'm able to access that through this profession. So I'm naming that because for me, that's a big part of my why. Of course, I want to help people. I love talking to people. I love how I become a better person when I extend empathy towards other people and whatever situations they might have going on. But those for me wouldn't be enough for me to sustain enjoying being a therapist. It is definitely this piece as well of I just love this so much. It's so fascinating. It's really interesting to me. And it started all the way back when I was 14 and trying to figure out how to navigate very severe panic disorder and learning the skill of systematic desensitization and applying it on myself, that I was hooked. It was just that, it was so interesting. And I've seen that in a lot of my friends and colleagues as well, that there's this intrinsic interest. Now, to be clear, I know plenty of therapists who don't have quite that same level of fascination in the human brain and still would choose this profession again. But just for me, I've found that drive is so strong that it kind of supersedes every other reason and makes me think that I'm going to still be doing this even when I'm well past the age of retirement, as long as my mind and my body allow me to, because I'm obsessed. The next question I'd want to ask before diving into this career is it intrinsically rewarding to talk to people all day? And it's important that I specify that you find it enjoyable to talk to other people about them, potentially about their problems, potentially about the same problems over and over again, and not talking about yourself. This is a trap that I think I see a few folks pop into, where you might say, I love talking to other people so much. It's my favorite. And then you get into the therapy profession and find that it's really wearing on you. And I think what mechanism might have gotten missed there is that for the person who says, I really love talking to people all day, so I could totally do this job, is in most other contexts outside of therapy, when you're talking to other people, you also talk about yourself. You're hearing from the other person, but you're also going, oh, I relate to, this happened to me, blah, blah, blah. And my experience talking to a friend, or even talking to the camera right now, where I insert little bits of my story here and there, is very, very different than when I'm sitting in the room with a therapy client and my focus is laser focus on them. It's not about me. I am not going to be chit-chatting about whatever I was up to earlier that day or how I connect with their story, except in very pointed circumstances where I believe it is potentially useful in their own growth or recovery, that sort of thing. It's very specific and intentional if I ever do speak about myself. And I think that mechanism is where a lot of people miss why they suddenly realize that they actually maybe don't enjoy this work quite as much as they thought, because you have to listen to other people without talking about yourself day in and day out. A little side note for those of you who are therapists feeling that kind of wearing you down over time, that you're just hearing other people talk about their experiences and you're not getting to sort of have these outlets for your experiences. I think that's one of the many reasons why this profession can be so isolating and there can be so much burnout. And so I do really encourage you to find those appropriate spaces where you can talk and you can talk freely. I can just rattle that off in a little podcast, but the act of actually going and finding those people and building those relationships is a huge amount of work, especially if you're already burned out. I mean, the energy isn't there, but I'm naming that because I genuinely believe like if I did not have those outlets myself, I would not be doing well. I'm very grateful that I have a lot of places where I can just jibber jabber about whatever the heck I want to. And sometimes that happens even here on this podcast. So find those outlets where you can, because we do need that. We're humans. If we don't have it, we're not going to do well after a while. So I'm just validating that. That's all. And another little side thought I'd add on to this is that personally, to me, the average therapist probably thrives best in more of a part-time therapy schedule as far as your face-to-face time seeing therapy clients. And so how you spend the rest of your time, could vary from person to person. I have this second business, Private Practice Skills, where I, spend the rest of my productive hours and then I wear my mom hat the rest of the time. And somebody else might, do something different with their time. But a lot of therapists over time are probably not going to be seeing 20 plus clients a week and thriving for their entire career. I'm just saying. There are some of you who that's you and you're all in and more power to you, but that's certainly not going to be 100% of therapists. And it might not even be the majority of therapists from my perspective. So when you ask this question about whether it's intrinsically enjoyable for you to talk to people all day, it's okay to wear the hat of thinking of it as, you're going to be doing that for a lot of graduate school and your post-grad training and potentially bits of your earlier career. And then you can kind of branch out over time. You don't have to talk to people all day long for the rest of your career. I mean, I certainly at least didn't follow the path of like full-time therapy clients for my whole career. I mean, if you account for graduate school up until when I started Private Practice Skills, that was about 10 years. So, there was a good chunk of my career where I was spending a lot of time sitting with therapy clients and talking. And now I just do that one day a week, and that's the right amount for me in this phase of my life. So you don't necessarily have to lock it in for the rest of your life of talking to people all day, every day, but you might need to buckle up for that for like a good chunk of time. And the last question that I wish I would have asked before becoming a therapist is, do I have a financial plan for all the years of training? And I'm not saying that to add any kind of doom and gloom to you to say, it's expensive and your income is delayed, so therefore don't enter this profession. But it is a reality. And I think if you can have that answered at least a little bit before you enter into the profession, it's only going to help you feel more equipped, more empowered to move through the grueling training process a little bit more smoothly. I think this path is going to look different for everybody. So I don't have a prescribed plan to say, do this, then that, and then the other thing. And this is how you're going to do the finances. But if you could think it through before you dive into graduate school, all the better. And I do think there's going to be at least some people who do the math and think, you know what? I'm actually good. I may not want to choose into this path that's going to cost me a lot upfront financially when maybe there's another viable path that's going to cost me less upfront financially, but bring me just as much joy or maybe more joy, who knows, or just knowing that, I can start saving for retirement or for buying that house or whatever other things that you want to prioritize might just take a higher value priority level in your mind. By all means, pivot. Save yourself the time and money from going down the path part way and then potentially regretting the decision or, backing out part way through, which is something that happens quite often, as we've talked about before. So there you go. Okay, and as promised, for y'all listening to the extended cut version of this episode, I put this poll out on Instagram asking you all to give your feedback about what you wish you'd asked yourself before entering the profession or what you think other folks should ask before entering the profession. And I thought it might be fun to read some of those responses anonymously and kind of react to them a little bit, share my thoughts. And you're definitely going to notice some themes pop up as we go through these. One person says, have you really identified and worked through your own issues? Ooh, that's like a little bit of a burn. Have you really, they put really in all caps, have you really identified and worked through all of your own issues? And I love this question because on the one hand, I totally agree with it. If we're entering into graduate school thinking I got all my stuff figured out. I don't need to, dig into whatever's going on for me at all whatsoever. I think that's kind of a recipe for disaster. On the other hand, if I look back at myself going into graduate school, had I worked through all of my issues by the time I entered graduate school as a 21-year-old, by the way, absolutely not. Like, not at all. I've worked through so much since then, gratefully, because that would be terrifying if I had to finish all of my working through things by the time I turned 21. And also, I hope that I will continue working through things from here on out. Like, I'm still a person with a whole bunch of life ahead of me, I hope. So I think there's a both and as I think on this question. And there's something a little bit dangerous, I think, in our careers approach to quote unquote figuring out all your stuff before entering the profession, because there's no such thing. So we're either going to end up telling ourselves that, oh, I can't enter this career because I'm a mess. I haven't figured out all my stuff, so I guess I can't be a therapist. Or worse, we're going to self-deceive ourselves into believing that we've already figured out all of our stuff and we don't need to do any more work because we figured it all out already. And now you have this very kind of egotistical, narcissist-leaning presentation as you step into a profession where you're supposed to help other people. So I think it's a much more helpful take to say, are you willing to be a lifelong learner? Have you already put a lot of work into identifying what's going on for you, what your hangups are, what your patterns are, maybe your unhealthy patterns? And are you willing to commit to continuously for your entire career, continuing to work on yourself and continue to grow? And I think that's a much more helpful question to ask. And isn't that what we're asking of our clients anyway? So whether you're entering the profession as a 21-year-old or a 58-year-old or a 75-year-old, I think the same question applies no matter what. And most importantly, are we modeling for our clients? Even if we're not telling our clients that we're working on ourselves, I think some of these things come through. Are we modeling for our clients that life is a lifelong growth journey and we're willing to be on that journey and we're inviting our clients to do that as well? I think that's just much better and accurate all around. Someone else says, what problem am I hoping to solve for people? And is being a therapist the best way to do it? I like that phrasing, and maybe touches a little bit on something I brought up earlier of so maybe you're trying to help people, for example, but can you be more specific? And as this person says, is being therapist the best way to help with that? There might be other ways to help with that. Potentially it's less of an upstream battle to accomplish those things. And maybe being a therapist is actually one of the best avenues to go ahead and do it, but it's a good question to ask. We're on the third response and we're already hearing a theme. This person says, am I ready to work on my own unfinished business while learning to support others? I mean, that's exactly what we just touched on a bit ago, and I completely agree. I like the phrasing of this next one. Can I hear other people's stuff without making it about my stuff? Oof. Isn't that so tough? Because it is about our stuff. Listen, we're still human, so we're going to hear other people's stuff, and then there's going to be this moment, for those who are self-aware enough at least, this moment where you go, ooh, that thing that my client is bringing up is poking at some of my own stuff. How am I doing? And of course, in the moment, you hold that space for your client. Maybe you compartmentalize it, set it aside for a second, earmark it for a consult group, something like that. But make sure you circle back to it and say, okay, this poked at some of my stuff. Does that disrupt the therapy experience? Is there anything I need to do with that stuff that it poked at? Et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it might poke at your stuff enough that you need to refer someone out. I have done that before. That is what's in the best interest of both you and your client. Mind you, when that's happening, if you're not able to help your client because you're getting too triggered, it's in your client's best interest to refer them to someone who can support them in the ways that they need. And it's also important to take care of yourself. And sometimes it's just okay, we're poking at some of my stuff right now. But I think I can safely hold space for my client as well, but maybe I need to kind of tend to myself in these other ways. Hopefully you have some supporters who are aware of that, especially if it's, a thread that pops up often. For me, it tends to be the same one or two things that kind of poke at my stuff and I go, oh, there it is again, bring it up in consult group again or whatever it might be and kind of keep circling back to it. But we need to be willing to do that. Someone simply asks, how is my own mental health? And yeah, I think that's a question we need to just constantly ask. Arguably more than the average career path is to just always be asking about our own mental health before we attempt to help other people. Not because our own mental health needs to be perfect, because there's no such thing, but we need to be asking and aware of anywhere that, our mental health might not be like quite on its top game. That's okay. I've seen many therapy clients in phases when my mental health was totally tanking, and actually seeing therapy clients help me be in a better place, and I was still able to access being there for my clients as well. So, it's important to just be mindful of what's going on there. Is your own mental health interfering with your ability to support your clients, or maybe it's still accessible to support your clients well, even if your own mental health is somewhere on the decline. And it is okay if seeing clients helps your mental health. That's been true for me almost universally. If I'm not in a good space, as soon as I enter the therapy session, it's like I'm out of my world and I'm in my client's world, and that's good for me. I need that sometimes. This is kind of an interesting question to ask. This person says, who in your family are you trying to save? Which is super interesting. I think, is it going to be universally true that we're all trying to save someone in our family? I'm sure there's exceptions, but I bet it is so common that we all have the someone in our family that we're trying to save, or, for me, as I reflect on my motivators for being a therapist, it was very much like, how do I keep people from going through the same stuff I've had to go through because I grew up in a narcissistically abusive family system, and my entire childhood and the first 10 years of my adulthood were terrible. I hated all of it. I hated all of my childhood, at least. And then I was an unhealthy mess the first 10 years of my adulthood. How do I keep other people from going through that? That's kind of my motivator. So is it that I'm trying to save myself? Is that so egocentric of me? I don't know, but these are the kinds of questions that are really helpful to reflect on. I don't think it necessarily means if you can identify some person you're trying to save, therefore this profession is not for you. I think it's just more important to shine light, have awareness on where those things are. So we're going into it with the lights on. Basically, we have all the lights on and we can see what's going on here. Okay, here's one that we touched on earlier. This person says, are you okay with not being a good fit for everyone? Yeah, earlier we talked about, not being able to help everyone. This kind of similar, the further into the profession I get, the more I embrace this concept of I am not the best therapist for everyone. And honestly, I'm only the best therapist for kind of a specific niche. It's not a majority of people. I can help a lot of different people and I have a particular niche, but even then, there's going to be much better therapists for a lot of these things than me. And am I open to, letting that be true, referring out, and just being totally okay with I'm not an expert in all the things. I'm just an expert in one or two things. So that's how expertise usually works. So it makes sense to refer out and just be comfortable. Be comfortable with knowing where your edges are and living within them. Someone else says, am I willing to work on myself throughout my therapy career? Yes, we touched on that. Here's an interesting take that I think is so true. This person says, am I ready to do a deep dive on myself during graduate school? Ooh, you know what? Here's some of my reactions to that, because on paper, it totally makes sense to me. You're in graduate school to become a therapist. So then, therefore, it makes sense to do a lot of work on yourself, reflect on yourself, etc. For me, at least, the reality was graduate school was incredibly taxing. I don't think I need to spell it out, right? I think that's probably a lot of people's experience, because you're financially stretched so thin, and then you have literally 1,000 pages to read a week or something like that. And I think there were phases of graduate school where I was writing 40 pages of assignments per week, a lot of those being personal reflection pieces, meanwhile writing a dissertation, meanwhile going to internship. Listen, we're stretched so thin, and to stretch someone so thin and then ask them, oh, by the way, can you dig into some of your deepest, personal, whatever, baggage, issues, growth edges? That's just it's not reasonable, honestly. So to me, I think it'd be more helpful to say, are you willing to hold space for caring for yourself well in graduate school, even if sometimes that means putting a pin in that maybe bigger item, that bigger personal growth item, self-reflection item, to say, I'm a little busy right now with graduate school that aligns with these goals that I have for later, but wow, I really unearthed a big thing here. And when I have a little bit more margin, a little bit more bandwidth, I really need to make sure I come back to this in my future. And I wish that was said out loud more in graduate school. And I find myself, like, I've worked with a number of therapist trainees as a therapist, and I find myself saying this so much to my trainee clients, like, you don't have to dig into, look at all that you're doing in school right now. Like, today doesn't have to be the day that you dig into that thing that is so important, that it deserves more of your emotional bandwidth and margin to give to it. And right now you're stretched so thin that it's not there, and that's not your fault. That's just the nature of this season. So maybe as like a caveat to this question of like, are you ready to dig into all your own personal stuff in graduate school, to say like, and can you also discern when, this moment is not the moment to dig into that like super, super deep personal thing. And yeah, maybe you're going to write a personal reflection essay on something that's like medium deep because it means you can finish the paper and your mental well-being is cared for as you dive into your exam the next day or whatever else you got going on. And that is a really effective way to practice self-care, in my opinion. Okay, this one's a little touchy. It says, are you a paperwork person? And then they go on to say that they've seen therapists fail because they can't keep on top of this. Fail. Even if the word fail feels painful to read this. There's a lot of paperwork. And then depending on the context, there can be more paperwork. But regardless of context, there is paperwork. And maybe it might just be more helpful, rather than saying, are you a paperwork person, to just go into it knowing, oh yeah, for every therapy hour that I have, depending on where I work, I may have an additional hour of paperwork afterward. Hopefully not every therapy hour has an additional hour of paperwork, but I've worked in places before where that was true. So how am I going to prepare for that? Is this still something I want to sign up for, knowing I'm going to be doing paperwork? Sometimes it's going to be a lot of paperwork, and it is okay too to choose career routes based on paperwork. Like, there's going to be some places where you work that it's a lot of paperwork, and some contexts where it's not that much paperwork. So something to consider. Here someone says, are you more introverted or extroverted? Can you picture yourself holding 30 hours of conversations weekly? 30 hours. I mean, I'll go back to something I said before. I don't think most people are going to thrive talking to clients 30 hours a week. It's just, that's an exceptional person, not every person, not the average person. I'm not going to thrive talking to people 30 hours a week. I'm just not. But there may be a season in your training where you are talking to people 30 hours a week. So I'd modify the question to say, like, are you willing to do that? Are you capable of doing that for a season? And if you want to continue that, go for it. But, you may need to do it for a few years, but you also don't have to do it forever. So, is that worthwhile to you? Okay, there's a lot more comments here, but I'm just going to do one more for now. And this person says, do you genuinely care about the pain of other people? Whew. Yeah, I think that I'm having a lot of reactions to that, because on the one hand, you're like, yeah, of course we have to care about the pain of other people, but something about using the word genuinely feels really powerful, because of course we all know we have to care for the pain of the people coming to see us, but that sense of like genuine, like I feel a sense of care, like I have this empathy of like, wow, that must be so hard or difficult, painful, whatever it might be, that costs us something to offer that genuine empathic care. And if it doesn't exist in you kind of more naturally, I think that is a harder thing to teach. So it is a good thing to ask. Like, if you see someone else in pain and you don't care, I just think it's going to be an uphill battle to offer really good therapy in that situation. And of course, all of us are going to have situations where we look at that and we go, it's hard for me to care for that specific type of situation because maybe it reminds us of some other thing that we've been through. We all have those kind of blind spots, but just generally, do we genuinely care for other people's pain? I think that is a really powerful component of effective therapy. Whew. Well, on that really deep note, I'm running out of time. If you wanted to get the little chitter chatter business on my end, I have like this little window to record this week's episode. And today I'm meeting with Danielle Swim of the Entrepreneurial Therapist for an IG Live, which I've never done before. I'm looking down because I'm trying to make sure that this is still recording, and it is. Technology. And so we're meeting for an IG Live in like 9 minutes, and I've never done an IG Live before, I know. So that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it. And we're going to adopt 2 kitties later today, I'm so excited, in like 4 hours. So I'm like, in the scramble, like quick do your workday mode so I can like go to the store and gather all the kitty things, because we had a cat, but that was 5 years ago, and we've moved like God knows how many times since then. So we need to get some kitty things before we adopt our kitties, and all of that is happening. So I'm going to sign off here, but I so appreciate you joining me. And if you didn't want to hear all that jibber jabber, I'm sorry. I can go there. But thank you for listening to the extended cut versions of these episodes. I'm always amazed at how many people listen, because it just feels like it's just Marie. Like everything I put out there is just Marie talking about whatever she wants to talk about. But the extended cut versions are just like, it's like unfiltered Marie. So it's just a little bit more vulnerable, I guess. And I'm glad that you're here. And I hope hearing some of these bonus questions was really helpful. Well, I enjoyed reflecting back on some of the things I wished I'd asked myself before getting started in this career. If you really dig into each of these questions and let yourself get into the nitty-gritty of them, I think it's going to really help you feel like you're making an informed decision before deciding to dive into the therapy career. And even if you are already a therapist, you've been a therapist a long time, it is helpful to ask these questions, at least the first 2, because we already did the grad school thing. But is this what you really want to do? Why are you here? Do you still enjoy talking to people all day? Are there any shifts or pivots you want to make? It's always okay to come back and ask those questions. You never have to be locked into one way of doing things forever. And until next time, from one therapist to another, or maybe an aspiring therapist, I wish you well.